All right. Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's live. My name is Brooke Kelley, and I will be coming to you every Tuesday at 9:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. I want to welcome all of you to today's meeting or live, whatever we're going to call this for today. What we're going to cover today is the subject of objections. And over the years, over the last almost 2 decades, I've had the privilege of coaching some of the very best of the best in the financial service industry, preparing them for massive pitches, working with them on how to recover relationships. So inevitably, inside of all of these different interactions, what comes up is this subject of objections. And what I always say about objections, and quite frankly, any other communication strategy, is that once you understand the anatomy of that thing, let's say it's an objection, once you truly understand the anatomy of any discipline, you can no longer be controlled by it. And in fact, the more mastery that you have over that, the more control you can exert. So when we talk about an objection, I always say objections are actually child's play. I say that because once you understand what's really at stake in an objection, you're no longer trying to win the objection or overcome the objection or trying to be right, more importantly, because amateurs try to be right in the face of an objection. When you're really a pro, what you understand is at stake in an objection is not the objection, it's the relationship. And when you begin to reframe the way that you look at objections, when you begin to reframe the way that you hear objections, because you begin to understand that an objection contains valuable information for you, that if you understand how to look for and hear that valuable information, your mind will now be consumed with listening deeply rather than defending or overcoming. There's a lot of study and science around how to overcome an objection. And today, I'm going to suggest to you that overcoming an objection is the byproduct of really understanding what's at stake when someone objects to you and what's available when someone objects to you. So the primary thing that's at stake in an objection is not the subject that is being spoken of. When we talk about the financial service industry, the 5 primary ways that individuals object to financial advisors would be fees, timing, decision maker, past bad experience, current good experience. Fees, timing, decision maker, past bad experience, current good experience. When we're talking about objections, what we understand is that what is being presented is not really what there is for you to address. They are breadcrumbs to what is actually at stake. And as I've said to you, the greatest threat is that the relationship is at stake. So if you go in looking to overcome, what you will typically do is be right about whatever it is you believe about objections, but you'll lose the actual relationship. So it's a very short-sighted, myopic, pedantic way to view an objection. If you begin to think about what's truly at stake, so if we look at the anatomy of communication, what is actually happening in an objection? Typically, you, let's say you're a financial advisor, are asserting something, you're saying something, and this person is objecting. So we could say that that really is in the same form in terms of language, statement, counter statement. Statement, counter statement in language is the same anatomy of an argument. Meaning, if we were to take a look at an argument in language, just looking at language, what happens in an argument is you say X and they say not X. When we're talking about objections, if someone says your fees are too high, no matter how creatively, covertly professional you are, if you say any version of no, they're not, what you've just done is engaged in a very high level professional argument. So what we want to do is introduce to you today, how do you keep in view what is the greatest thing to keep in view in an objection, which is always the relationship. So let's take a look at whenever you are in a consultative selling situation, you're always wanting to keep your eye on 4 different scales. How much leverage do I have? How much rapport do I have? How much trust do I have? And the cumulative score of those 3 scales is going to give you the ultimate scale in sales is agreement. The degree to which somebody continues to agree with you as you move them through your codified sales process that doesn't feel robotic and doesn't feel canned, but the degree to which they continue to agree with you is the degree to which you will close that sale. And let me make sure that I'm clear. I'm not saying ask them questions 7 times that have them say 7 yeses in a row. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying the degree to which they agree with your appearance, the degree to which they appear with your grooming, the degree to which they agree with the sound of your voice, the degree to which they agree with your gestures, the degree to which they enjoy the way you handle them during the more vulnerable moments. That's what I'm talking about when I say agreement. So when we look at an objection, what we know is that the greatest scale here that is at stake is this agreement scale. And this agreement scale is the mother scale. It is the bottom line as to whether or not you're going to close that business. So when we talk about the anatomy of an objection, what I want you to first understand is what they're saying, what they're sharing is the socially acceptable version of what's really driving why they are opposing your recommendation. So hear that again. What they're actually saying to you is not the real objection. So if you take that bait, that would be amateur because you would miss the whole show that's going on behind the scenes, which is why I say you must understand the anatomy of an objection. As human beings, we've been taught how to occur, how to present in different environments. You go into a retail sales store and you know what's coming. They say to you, can I help you with anything? You have your ready-made, that's okay, I'm just looking. What we know is that is a socially acceptable way for you to blow off a retail sales individual. Inside of different consultative selling environments, there are more sophisticated methods that consumers or clients or prospects will use to blow you off. What we're talking about today is an objection. So how do they typically blow off a financial advisor? They will oppose your fees. They'll tell you that they're too high. They will oppose the timing, which will sound like some version of not now. They will oppose you in terms of them being able to be the decision maker. They will say to you, past bad experience, this sounds like something that didn't go well either for me or someone that I care about. Or they will say, I'm happy with my current advisor, which is current good experience. So it's fees, timing, decision maker, past bad experience, current good experience. So when we take a look at the anatomy of that, what you have to understand is behind that socially acceptable statement back here is the premise from which they are making that statement. The premise of that statement contains their values. It contains their pain. Until you're actually handling their values or their pain, you are not going to overcome that objection. But as you overcome the objection, you must understand that the greatest thing at stake is the relationship. So how do we do that? We have codified a process that will allow you to overcome an objection while most importantly, maintaining that agreement score. There is no use in being right about an objection that's presented by a prospect or a client or any relationship that you value. There's no use in being right about that if you diminish that agreement score. That wasn't the best move, right? You're going to pay for that later, or you're going to pay for that at the close. So when we take a look at an objection is typically presented in a socially acceptable way. In other words, we've been taught how to interact with people. We've been taught what is offensive. So we learn to navigate how to essentially object to someone without really giving them the real why. At the end of the day, whatever it is they choose, is some version of you are not demonstrating enough value for them to overcome their own inertia, for them to overcome their loyalty to their current advisor, for them to overcome what they would have to do to get their spouse to get on board with this, for them to overcome your fees and what they would have to do in terms of income to make that feel like it works. The bottom line is, when they're giving you any objection, the bottom line is you have not presented enough value for them to get over themselves. So what you want to understand is what's behind what they're presenting. What is the premise? And the premise will always contain pain and their values. So let's take a look at how do we suggest, how have I prepared some of the industry's best for massive pitches and for the inevitable objections. The first thing you must know is how you are most likely going to be objected to, which I've shared with you. Fees, timing, decision maker, past bad experience, current good experience. So what I would suggest to you is that part of the questions that you ask in what we would refer to as the discovery phase include those 5 general categories. But once you've received the objection, what do you do with that? The first step in overcoming an objection is to replay what they said. Now, when I say replay, let me tell you what I didn't say to be sure you don't do this. I didn't say summarize. I didn't say half replay. I want to use the word verbatim because what you want to do is replay what they said verbatim. And please don't do that odd thing that people have been taught at conferences, which is what I think I'm hearing you say is, and then replay. In a normal interaction here on planet Earth, we don't preface our language with what I think I'm hearing you say is. So that is strange, even if it's occurred as normal in a conference environment. That's a bubble. And here on planet Earth, that is a strange way to speak. So when someone says to you, your fees are too high, you would say to them, my fees are too high. You would replay that back. If you want to truly master this, you would not only replay the words, you would replay the inflection, the speed, the emotional tone, the gestures if you can, the facial expressions if you really want to go deep. You're going to replay everything that they said, the way that they said it, so that they understand that you were truly listening. One of 2 things is going to happen when you do that. They're either going to feel deeply understood and heard, or they're going to realize that what they just said is not what they meant, which is equally valuable because you would hate to overcome an objection based on an assumption without clarifying, is that what you said? So a replay can actually serve to clarify as well. So step 1 is replay. Step 2 is to verify. So after you've said, my fees are too high, what they're going to do is shake their head, or if they don't, you're going to step in with a verification statement that would simply sound like, am I hearing you correctly? Are we on the same page? Did I understand you? You're going to make a statement. It needs to be genuine, that demonstrates that you really care enough and that you're not so arrogant as to think you got it right. What this is also going to do for those of you who know that you get defensive when you're encountering objections is the replay and the verification step are going to allow you to simmer down while they are experiencing you as very receptive. So step 1 is to replay. Step 2 is to verify. Step 3 is to probe for specificity. Probing for specificity means you're now going to look for, remember what I said, the premise behind what they're presenting as the objection. And the premise will always contain some form of pain or some values or both. So a probe for specificity, and you may have to do a couple, could sound like, when you say my fees are too high, can you say more about that? Or you might say, I'm just curious, when you say that my fees are too high, would you mind sharing with me how it is you assess fees? Notice I didn't say why. I'm never going to ask why in a probe for specificity unless I would like to upset them intentionally or have them feel like they're on the witness stand. That's the only time we would use a why, when we want to cause an upset. which is not the goal in this series of steps. So I'm going to probe for specificity as step 3. Once I feel that I have hit the premise, which is going to contain pain and values, now I can come in with the big daddy, the massive play, which is an acknowledgement statement. An acknowledgement statement is a statement that would have another human being feel deeply understood. To feel deeply understood, if I'm sitting on the receiving end and I'm going to be acknowledging them, must ideally use some form of their language, some form of their thought process, but what I'm going to convey to them in my own words and some of theirs is some version of, I heard what you said and I understand how important that is to you. Don't say that phrase. I'm saying that's what you would convey in language. So it could sound something like, if we're using that fees example again, it could sound like, given what you've shared with me about your experience with fees and how that's impacted your trust, I can appreciate how this would be a large consideration for you. I didn't say they were right. I definitely didn't say they were wrong. I didn't say that I was right. I didn't say that my fees are not too high. I said to them, I understand, given what you've shared with me, how it is you would arrive at this conclusion. And if I'm really good, I would bring in other data from our interaction that would further validate that you understand why they would have this perspective. Be careful with language here, because this is where you unintentionally can invalidate a person or evaluate. So we do not use invalidation or evaluation inside of an acknowledgement statement. An acknowledgement statement is intended to have a person feel deeply understood. When you master an acknowledgement statement, you will find that you will see them physically change in front of you, meaning their facial muscles might actually relax. You might see their pupils dilate. You might see them sit back more comfortably in the chair. You're going to see a shift. And what that shift will indicate is that you have just increased the agreement score because they now feel deeply understood. So we use the acknowledgement statement to ensure that they understand that you understand where they're coming from. The degree to which they feel acknowledged and understood is the degree to which they're going to grant you permission to change their mind, which is ultimately what you need to be able to do when you encounter an objection, right? So the degree to which they feel understood is the degree to which they're going to grant you permission to change their mind. After the acknowledgement statement, you're going to isolate. The isolation statement is a tongue twister. It's a mouthful, but essentially you're going to say something along the lines of, if I were able to address the issue of my fees, and I'm not suggesting that I can or that I have, but if I could, is there anything else that would preclude us from taking the next step? What that isolation step does for you is it ensures that there are not other landmines out there that you haven't yet encountered before you go in with the final step, which is a reframe. So let me say that again. The purpose of the isolation statement is so that you can be sure to unearth any other unknown objections to you. Because when you come in with the reframe, you want that to be the mic drop. You want that to be the gavel going down. You want that to be the final show. And if you're not aware that there are other objections out there and you come in with, a size 2 reframe when they've got 6 other objections, and that's really more like a size 20 reframe, then you will inevitably have done all of this work for nothing. So the isolation statement is really insurance before you come in with the reframe statement. If you'd like to learn more about the reframe statements and how to actually use a custom made to measure reframe, you should consider attending the webinar that Serrano is hosting this Wednesday at 12:15 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. We'll make sure that that's linked below, where he's going to go over objections and specifically address 12 unique reframes that we've created over 2 decades after hearing hundreds of thousands of objections inside of specifically the financial service industry. And what we created is essentially a map, meaning when you receive this objection, this is the reframe that goes hand in hand with that, so that you do not have to think about it so much. You can actually be there displaying the EQ, emotional intelligence skills, and empathy needed to match the moment. The bottom line is, when you have an objection, your skills must be greater than the complexity of that objection. Think about that. When they bring you an objection, depending on the complexity of it, your skills must usurp the complexity of that objection, which is why I say to you, once you understand and master the anatomy of objections, knowing that what they present with is never the ultimate objection, that what's behind it, which is there for you to uncover, is the actual objection. What they present is the socially acceptable veneer, the way that they've been taught to not offend the world, but get out of things and keep you at arm's length. What you want to get interested in is what's behind that. When you use our process, where you replay, verify, probe for specificity, acknowledge, isolate, and then reframe, that's 6 steps, not 5. When you use our process to do that, what you'll find is that individuals on the other side are going to experience feeling deeply understood. And when you understand that what's at stake the most when an objection occurs is because your ego gets triggered and they're feeling protective based on probably past experiences, what you end up having is you're fighting somebody else's fight. Somebody else did this to them, not you. Don't resolve that. Take both of you out of that so you can think analytically. And the way that you do that is with this 6-step process. The key is understanding that anything, whether it's recovery in a consultative selling environment or objections in a consultative selling environment, or reframes, asking for referrals, forming mastermind groups and dealing with the complexity of mastermind groups. All of these are subjects that we cover in the webinars. What I want you to know is, when you understand the anatomy of something, you will know how to control it. Until such time, these things will feel like they are difficult. They are not difficult because they are actually difficult. They are difficult because you do not understand the anatomy of an objection. Once you understand what they've just presented is not the actual objection, once you understand that I need to be looking for pain and values, once you understand how to ensure that they are receptive by replaying, verifying, probing, acknowledging, all of that is creating a receptive individual on the other side, willing to hear your reframe. Once you understand the anatomy of this, and you begin to also understand, if you're in financial advisory, what you know is there are 5 ways people are going to object to you. Really, think about all the objections you've ever received. They harken back to these 5: fees, timing, decision maker, past bad experience, current good experience. So you understand, okay, I'm going to receive 5. I understand the anatomy, and I understand the 6-step process. And if you attend the webinar, you'll know exactly which reframe to bring to the party when it presents. What you begin to feel is mastery over this subject. And that mastery is going to have you be able to control these interactions without injuring other human beings as you control them. There will be a mastery and a dance to this that allows you to not only overcome the objection, but more importantly, safeguard the relationship as you do it. I cannot tell you how invaluable these skills are. I also want to highlight, as I close out, you want to be so good at objections that you can actually begin to create them intentionally at the beginning of a sales cycle, so that you know where the greatest volatility lies and you have more time on the clock to overcome them. So once you understand the anatomy, you will not only know how to overcome them, you will cause them intentionally because you know how to control them, and then you'll have more time on the clock to overcome them. I wish you the very best of luck. And at the end of the day, sales is like a petri dish of how you handle and manage relationships. It's not this other part of you. And when I've coached some of the world's best financial advisors in their communication skills, what they all have in common is they don't become some other weird person when they're selling. They are truly themselves. And that is because they have taken the skills of overcoming objections as an example, and those are now assimilated into who they are. So they don't need to become some other strange, odd person when they overcome an objection. And in that way, there's total alignment and authenticity between their nonverbal gestures and what's coming out of their mouth and who they occur as inside of an objection and outside of an objection. I wish you the very, very best of luck forming important, meaningful relationships. And I challenge you to really master the anatomy of objections. And for more information on this, I also want to invite you to a webinar that Serrano will lead this Wednesday, 12:15 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. I hope to see you there, and very best of luck. Thank you for being here. And that completes today's live.